Hi, I'm Marc Sumner, CEO and founder of Robertson Sumner. Welcome to the Channel Chat podcast, where we will share learnings, best practices and failures with some of the biggest names in the IT industry. This week I was joined by Dave Stanley from Aditinet, who was a great guest. Really enjoyed the show myself. We covered topics such as lack of relationships in sales, vendor talent shortages, and also as well a hot topic which was collaboration and trust in the channel, or lack of it in the channel. So hopefully you enjoy it. So listen up and enjoy. Hello, I'm Marc Sumner, host of the Channel Chat podcast show. And today I have Dave Stanley, MD of Aditinet UK in the building. How are we doing, Dave?
Brilliant, really well, Mark. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me along.
No, thanks very much for coming in. Now, Dave, we obviously met at the CRN Awards, which I will go into a bit later after you robbed me of the award for Channel Services Provider of the Year. So I'm still not happy about.
Yeah,
but I did hear that you started your career not in sales, in the civil service. Wow. Is that right?
Wow, that's LinkedIn for you, right?
Yeah.
It is actually, yeah, Mike. So not long after I left school, had a couple of jobs, bookshop, Tesco's, and then joined the civil service for 7 years.
And tell me about that. What did you actually do then?
So I worked for the prosecution service. So I worked in the law courts, prosecuting people, criminals, generally speaking. But also had a grounding across HR, accounts, finance, so management. That's where I did my first management role, actually, even at a young age. So, it was a really exciting time, really interesting time. But it also brought quite a lot of things to your attention, right, working with criminals.
Really, yeah, okay. Not to get in trouble.
Not to get in trouble was one. I remember back at the time I did a fairly large case of a murderer, actually, his birthday was about 2 weeks apart from mine in terms of being born. And what was interesting is my career had gone on quite a long way when I read that he'd come out of prison. So yeah, it's not just those lessons generally, but also the impact of that criminality.
Scary.
Yeah, it was.
In terms of then getting into a sales, because you did enter a sales career after that, didn't you?
I did, yeah. When I left the civil, it was one of those things. So I was in the civil service where progression is good, but relatively slow. And as a young person, sort of mid-20s, wanted to try something different, go out, and sales was where it was at. It's a lot of money for somebody who hadn't been to university or anything like that. So left there to start selling at a marketing company, first of all, which was very interesting. We were doing shrink wrap sleeves, free glass with a bottle of martini, shampoo and conditioner, bundled together. It was great. It's good stuff. So that was the start of my sales.
And then I did hear as well you were a dodgy car salesman.
Wow, you're very well informed. So yes, I went into car sales, Land Rover, so luxury car sales, but for a very short period of time. Wasn't the best experience. I can tell you why. I live in Oxfordshire, so it's fairly rural. And one guy who was the car salesman there was a farmer's son. So we had half of the county locked up, and the other guy had been there 20 years. So the other half of the county locked up, and literally I sat there watching people just buy from them, relationship after relationship. Wow. Which in itself was a great lesson.
It is a great lesson there. If you've got the relationships, you're going to have the money.
Absolutely. So it didn't take me long to learn that valuable lesson, then move on.
Harping on that point, and I'm sort of digressing slightly, how do you think it is if someone goes into an environment and they haven't got any relationships, especially in IT, because that comes up a lot. I get a lot of grads come up to me and say, oh, well, I don't know anyone and no one will speak to me or no one will take my calls. So almost obviously when you worked at Land Rover, that's obviously on a different scale. But what's your view on that when someone says to me, oh, I haven't got the relationships, I can't sell anything?
Yeah, well, I think the reality is you have to start somewhere. Nor did those people. To build a relationship, you have to start from zero. And if you think about the whole relationship of selling something at any time or anybody buying or engaging, there was a time when they didn't. And you have to work through those stages. And, I'm a great believer in that methodology and that approach to work through.
Yeah, fantastic. So your first break into IT was where?
So that was Sophos. So many people know that now. But at the time, I come from Abingdon, Oxfordshire, which is where Sophos is headquartered. And I literally walked into the local recruitment agent, and they said, there's this brand new company and they're recruiting people for sales. So it took me along, happened to know somebody else who was there I went to school with, went through the interview, went through the interview, got a job inside sales. That was it.
Starting at the bottom.
Started at the very bottom, had no idea. This was the time when antivirus products, so Sophos was an antivirus company at that stage, it wasn't something that everybody knew, wasn't something that everybody had. So very much at the bottom.
Yeah. And what was that, cold calling? Is it new business or account management, or what was it?
Mostly cold calling. So I was just aligned to a more senior person. She was fantastic from the very off. She was brilliant on the phone. Taught me. There wasn't a training program in place, but I ended up being very lucky to be aligned with somebody who really took care and attention in trying to make me or help me succeed. And it was, literal cold calling from Yellow Pages.
And talk about your progression up there, because I believe, again, looking from LinkedIn, which I stalked you on, you ended up as general manager at Soft.
Yeah. I mean, as I mentioned, I went there when it was fairly small. So I think I was the 30th or 31st employee there, which was, bearing in mind that it was a technical company. A lot of people were technical. That was quite early on. And then I guess I grew as the company grew, very much so. As we got bigger, the sales manager left. So first of all, I was inside sales for just over a year, and then I got given my own patch, and my own patch in this case was different letters of the alphabet. And I think on your show, a bigger target and a bit of responsibility.
Yeah, once you get reward for being successful, a bigger number, a bigger target.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so I worked through that, got my own patch, as it were, and we had parts of the alphabet and then also a vertical market. So mine happened to be health and education, which in itself was a brilliant learning curve, because Sophos at the time were a direct organisation, didn't have the channel that they've got now, but health and education were very channel orientated areas. So it led me by default to start working in the channel very, very early on, which led to quite a lot of success, which again, as a lesson, taught me the value of the channel over just one person selling direct. And then when the time came and the sales manager left, they moved me into that role.
How did you get recognised for being a sales manager? Because there must have been other people that wanted that job.
There were people who had been at the company for longer, or had been salespeople for longer. I think it was a mixture of the sales success, which a lot of people are measured on anyway, which I think is often a false measure of success. Just that's your number. But I think the period that I had in the civil service and the experience that I had probably stood me in good stead. The methodologies that I introduced and the fact that I'd been working in the channel.
Do you think, Dave, and it's an interesting point you touched on there, because I think a lot of people, when they come to us, will say, I've been the most successful salesperson, I should be the manager. Or, I've been there the longest, I should be the manager. What would you say to people that have been either using longevity or success in a sales as in a role as a reason why they should be promoted?
Yeah, I think it's a false reason. I think that they themselves need to take a step back and assess what they're doing. I think for many people, we just believe there's a career progression is the next job title up. And actually, and again, this is one of the things that you see in the civil service that I carried over to a sales organisation, is some people could be really valuable to a company as an individual contributor rather than a managerial contributor. Yeah. And I've seen so many people get promoted based on performance but not enjoy the job. You lose control. Yeah. It's not one number that makes you your number. It's not one number that you get your commission paid on. It's everybody's. And very soon, unless you've got those, and there's probably a special skill set, unless you've got that empathy, unless you've got that ability to coach, very quickly you prefer to step back. And that's quite a difficult step to make.
And also as well for the ego, I've had it myself where I think I'm a great recruiter, terrible manager, but by default, because I thought I was a good recruiter, I shouldn't be promoted. And taking a step back is difficult for the ego. So what advice would you give to people that are maybe fantastic in sales, that want to go into management, but maybe haven't got the skill set? What should they be doing?
I think they should be really taking a good look at successful people who are not in management. There are an awful lot of successful people not in management. What do they want? Do they want that extra responsibility? Because generally speaking, if they're successful in sales, they've done well commercially. They've got a lot of money.
And a lot of the time as well, the successful salesperson knows more than the manager anyway.
They tend to, yeah. I mean, if you're a good manager, then you need to be a good delegator as well. So what you're trying to do is get a percentage out of many, many people, as opposed to doing brilliantly yourself in that role. And that was actually one of the interesting, I think, learning points of Sophos, was when I was made the manager. I was obviously a lot younger than I am now. Was that thought that I had to be better than everybody else at everything. And it was a real step forward when I realised you can hire people who are better than you at selling. You can hire people that are better than you at channel. And you can develop people to be better than you as well without needing to know that yourself.
And I think if you're going to do that, again, I certainly didn't master it because, you know, I had to give it to someone else. But it's taking your ego off the table then, isn't it? Because if you're thinking, I'm the best salesperson, if you don't hire anyone better than yourself at sales, then you're going to be limited anyway.
You will be limited. And ego plays into so many things. I've always liked that EGO. Everybody's got one. It's just how you manage it. Yeah. And from that perspective, it can be a real blocker of success. Ego. I mean, it stops you climbing down on situations. It stops you understanding situations, simply because you think you're supposed to. And as I said, you know, for a lot of people, they think progression is moving their job title forwards, and it may not be. You know, it might be opening up some different department that you've got. It might be opening up different organisations, selling to different people. There's all sorts of progression, and I think that's one of the things that really came through, again, as a civil service, that held me in great stead from a sales management perspective.
So, being successful at Sophos, how did you put yourself in the spotlight to be recognised? Because there must have been, as I said, there must have been other people. So how did you get recognised for that?
Yeah, as I said, you know, doing health and education led me that there were, especially in the IT, so security, there were quite a few channels that we had to work through. So selling directly to a hospital wasn't on the table. Selling via a channel who sold to hospitals was. And so what happened was I, if you like, introduced methodology that allowed me to go and sell to those channels. And that was very new for Sophos at the time. We weren't a channel orientated company. So my proposal for me moving forward was we needed to move across to the channel.
Right.
And I was lucky because the person that that was my mentor, if you like, when I first started as inside sales, she was one of the people who I stepped over to be the sales manager, and she was the most supportive person you could have. And I think that, you know, when you're working in an environment and you've got heavy support as well, that you've worked on over a period of time, and people are prepared to give that to you, that also put me in good stead to the job, to the role.
Yeah, because there's got to be, normally when someone takes over as the manager, especially if they've been in the team, there's a lot of disgruntled people sometimes. You have the supporters, of course. Actually,
absolutely.
Dave did a great job. He's going to be a great manager, etc. But you also have the people that are a bit envious of Dave. Oh, Dave shouldn't be the manager. So how did you deal with that sort of conflict internally?
Yeah, I mean, that was true. Some people left. I think the other thing that happened at Sophos around that time was just an evolution. You know, some people that had been there a long period of time went to do something different as a result of that decision. We'd also brought on some newer people, some fresh blood, if you like, with some new way of thinking, and the marketplace itself was changing. So whilst there were one or two people who were less impressed, you know, I mean, that just goes towards proof. I mean, it's like anything else. You have to prove yourself. You have to prove what you've got. And I think as we changed the format of the way we sold generally into channel, then people just got on board, and it didn't really take that long, because once we had one or two senior people, the rest happened for us.
Okay, great. And so sales manager, existing
sales manager,
and then where from there?
And then we grew. We continued to grow. I mean, Sophos as an organisation grew, and I stepped up to be general manager of the UK. So at a slight separation, we became an international company. And then I was looking after not just sales, but the technical aspects, the support, which was always really high on Sophos' agenda, and the marketing, and everything that was UK based.
Wow, and that must have been quite a big adjustment, really, from just concentrating on sales and a number to everything.
Yeah, it was. Again, you know, at that time, so we were moving forward into the high hundreds of people, but I'd been there from the start. So as people came on board, working those relationships, and if you think about the channel generally, and you think about relationships generally, they happen internally as well as externally. And bringing people on board and having, you know, the understanding of what we wanted to achieve as a company was important, and allowed a fairly easy step in that direction.
Fantastic. So you had 10 years there.
I did.
What made you decide to leave after that period of time? Because obviously you were probably top dog there at the end.
Yeah, I think I had 10 years there. you know, there was a moment. So if anybody's been to Sophos, it's got a fantastic building. The Queen opened the building for us, and meeting the Queen was kind of one of those big career, not changing moments, but milestones. And it was okay. What's next? And you know, I was still relatively young at the time. It's gone it's a long time ago. And I just had ambitions to do other things. And I think at the time, because I'd moved up quite a long way, there were very few steps forwards. You know, going back to that ego thing, I probably suffered from it then, you know, myself, in terms of what do I do next? What can I do next? And it felt that my route was outside the company, not inside the company.
Right. Okay. So let's move on a bit. So you had a couple of jobs, but I want to progress slightly. So you went to Proofpoint as the MD.
Yes. Yeah.
So tell me about that experience there.
Yeah. So Proofpoint at the time, and just before that, and just to touch on that, I worked at Cypher Trust. So they were both it's kind of like in that gateway space. Proofpoint at the time had been in the UK, but had kind of moved away from the UK a little bit and just focused on North America. And they came back, so my role was to effectively relaunch it. And you know, brilliant product, brilliant people, just hadn't necessarily got the market right first time round. So I went in there to build a brand new team, if you like, and relaunch Proofpoint. So quite exciting at the time. Absolutely phenomenal CEO, Gary Steele, who's still there, by the way. But he was the reason I joined Proofpoint, and they were just great people.
Great. So let's progress further. I know you had a couple of other jobs in between them, but let's progress further. So what was the reason you decided to start a company doing Aditinet? How did it happen?
Right. So I was doing some stuff myself anyway. I'd done training, so I'd done some sales training, so I think it's massively important. And as we were doing that stuff, I was approached by an Italian company called Aditinet, who were reaching the outsides of the Italian market in terms of the growth rate that they could achieve. And they asked me if I would consider looking after the company and building the company over here. And that was based on one of the old relationships, because I'd been running EMEA for Proofpoint, for Cypher Trust, for Imperva. So I knew them from that background. And I thought it was an interesting opportunity, an interesting proposition. And so we took that on board, and we went to speak to some of the bigger distributors about opening up what at the time was supposed to be a full service end-to-end value-added reseller, which is what they are in Italy.
There's only another 10,000 in the UK. So.
Which was
you're going to be different.
So yeah, as you always do, right? You kind of like think we will be different, and we went to speak to everybody, and they said you're not different. You're kind of exactly the same as.
That burst your balloon, didn't you?
Yeah, and so we trudged away from the meetings, and but what they did give us was some fantastic feedback on the culture that was within Aditinet, which was a very technical culture. So they trained people, they did a lot of their own servicing. And the feedback that we got from some of the bigger distributors was, we don't need a VAR, but some of your technical expertise is really interesting to us and would be interesting across our channel. So we kind of went away, and we had a look at the business case again and made a decision to not do products at all, but just do the services, the professional services around the products that we knew.
And that was around security.
Security, so it's security focused. So you know, products like F5, Palo Alto Networks, Blue Coat. So we made that decision to do that, and we went back to all of those distributors and said, we're going to do this. Would that be interesting? Second time we were met with a lot more positivity, and decided that was the model we're going to pursue.
And for the listeners out there who are listening, hopefully, you white label services on behalf of either a distributor or a channel partner, of a reseller, out to end users.
Yes. So we began by doing that. I mean, obviously, I'm sure it's a topic. We'll talk about the skills gap, but the reality is there are lots of jobs out there. There weren't enough people to do it. So we brought in the talent. Either we brought it across from Italy, we hired it, we found it. And to start with, we were very much white labelled. So we were working on people's behalf, wearing their T-shirts, carrying their email addresses.
Did they give you like business cards and say pretend to be here? Or
yeah, in the early days, people asked us to pretend to be them, and as I say, we'd carry their email addresses and we would communicate as if we were them, which, you know, in today's social media world is not the easiest place to be, because it was quite quick that people could pick up that you weren't necessarily working for the company you're representing. So quite quickly, and maybe after that first year of being behind the scenes, people we're working with a third party. It's these guys. Is that okay? So it was a question. It was, is that okay to do that? And most companies were fine with that. They needed the job. They need the job being done.
Yeah, no, I think most companies would be fine with that.
Yeah.
Would you say, is there in any companies that wouldn't be fine with it? What's the main reason to sort of say, well, actually, and whether they knew you or not, why wouldn't they want to be outsourced to a third party?
I think sometimes it's security, it's relationships. For some people, they've got the contractual obligations that they need to do it in a certain way. You know as well as I do that there are some smoke and mirrors that exist in the channel. And for some people, it was, again, going back to that old friend ego, I want my company to look bigger. And so we were a means to their company looking bigger around about that stage.
Was there any resistance from them to introduce you in terms of, you might nick my customers? Because you said earlier you don't do product.
We don't do product, no.
So you're a services business.
Yeah.
Was there any sort of ego or threat that they could actually think, well, actually, if we do introduce Dave or one of your team, could he take the relationship off us? Could he actually take them direct?
Yeah, and we've seen this as a problem, and that's one of our objectives, that independence sits inside our objective, and our business model, and our mission statement, and for that it's just proof. We talk about it, and we've always said this. We'll say this in a meeting. We can talk about it and tell you that that's what we're like, but only after we've done a couple of jobs will you believe us, and people did. And you just start building up that reputation for longevity and for honesty, and very soon we were picking up some really strong partners that repeat business with us.
Because and you're right, because I hear a lot about collaboration in the channel is not as good as it could be, or trust in the channel isn't good as good to be, and at the end of the day, the channel is only as good as the collaboration and trust in the partners it's in. How do you overcome that? Talking, saying, yeah, we're honest, we're collaborative, etc., but not being able to demonstrate it to a new client, because there's going to be resistance sometimes.
Yeah, actually, could Dave start selling product, or could they do that? So how do you sort of overcome that? Yeah, I think that's true, and I don't think that will ever go away, if I'm perfectly honest. And we've seen people in our space succumb to that, and as you mentioned, we can talk it, but unless we get the opportunity to prove it, it's impossible. It's completely hypothetical. Because we're in a space where eventually the need outweighs that risk, we end up being in a position where we get to prove ourselves. And our guys are instructed, and we are as well, because we'll go on calls with end users to identify new opportunities. We'll put them back. We've often had end users will contact us to say, we've got new jobs. Can you come back and do more work? We put that straight back to the reseller. And as soon as we can demonstrate those things, then that relationship solidifies even more.
So let's move on to sort of tech shortages. Now, obviously, this is something going to be close to your heart, because that's your business. How do you overcome tech shortages, or balancing the act of acting, having people on your payroll without having the work or the jobs or the committed spend from the distributors or the clients?
Yeah, and that you're absolutely right. That's a big balance that we're always seeing, and that's probably the reason we exist to start with. So if we take that back first of all to where the channel sit, hiring a person, generally speaking, for a new technology isn't cost effective, and it's quite expensive, and they might look at that and they say, we've got 1 day of work, and our proposition is, if we can find 5 of those people, we've got 5 days of work a week. And so for us, what we're doing when we're working in the channel and the distribution layer is we're starting to understand where those jobs are, so we can make better decisions on where we put the investment. But it's still there. It's still a risk for us to invest, and we found this in the early days, that we spent a lot of money getting people up to certain standards before all of that trust was built. But now, as we're working with the channel, we're working with vendors as well, to understand what their pipelines are and where their shortages are, because there are the shortages that you mentioned. We're starting to just make some slightly better decisions around that.
So would you say that, once you've, say for instance, you've got a client that says, oh yeah, I want 1 day a week, and you've prepared to invest and get them up to speed, once they've been successful and they've actually got 5 days of work, is there a threat that they can actually say, do you know what, Dave, thanks for making us so successful, we've actually got 5 days now, we'll take Joe Bloggs off you, and we don't need you anymore?
Yeah. Well, I think it's an inevitability. It's not really a threat. It's this should happen. It's in our business model. You know, I mean,
so you're prepared for that. You know that's going to happen eventually.
It's got to happen, right? Because the reality is, you'll then have 6 days. Because if you continue to be successful, you'll always have the part of the next week or the next month or the next year. And so the way that we position ourselves, even with partners who have got good technical skills, is we're your overspill. You know, you've got what you're capable of, but eventually you'll reach the ends of what you're capable of. If you're successful, call us then. You know, we're not here to replace you.
It's a great way of thinking about it.
Absolutely. We're not here to replace you. We're not here to stop you growing your business. We're here to enable you to grow your business. But, you know, if a vendor's coming out and wants you to be technically trained or to do that role for them, you may feel that that's not appropriate today. But as soon as you're successful, then please do so. Because the reality is you'll continue to be successful. You know, some of our best partners are people who carry a lot of technical ability themselves. So they attract work. You know, they look for work, they find work, and all we are is the overspill.
So you'd collaborate with similar companies to yourself. If they have an overspill of work, which said they've got a job for Cisco accreditations, and they suddenly say, oh, actually, we need some Palo Alto accreditations. Oh, we've got a bit of an overspill. They might outsource it to you.
Absolutely. So we've got some great relationships in the channel, companies that are similar to us. So we focus on security. As you just mentioned, some people focus on networking, maybe audio visual. And as you're working with a company and you build that trust, they'll come back to you and say, do you know anybody who can do this, or could you do this? And largely we'll either swap, we'll cross-pollinate, we'll just hand out deals, and we get it back. I think
so
it's real
sometimes it's literally like, I might have an AV opportunity, go and call Joe Bloggs down the road, and you'll just pass it down the road.
Yeah, literally. I mean, we had we won a massive hospital refresh deal in London. Massive. And we went to scope it out. We took a partner to scope it out. But it being the NHS and it being that, the margins were tight. We passed it over in its entirety.
Really? So you've done all the groundwork, proposals, won the deal, passed it over?
Yeah. But likewise, anytime they see a security opportunity in their environment, they come back to us.
Now, before, unless I'm completely wrong, what would normally have happened in that situation is we win the deal. It's like, right, we now actually need to get someone in AV, and we'll just start trying to do it ourselves. Why is it such a positivity that there's more collaboration now and we'll pass deals over without potentially getting any reward in the background?
I think one of the first things is there's a genuine skills gap. I mean, it is a situation where there's more work than we can all do ourselves. And by us trying to spread ourselves too thinly, that would be a danger to our business. And we've made a conscious decision to be fairly focused in what we do. We'd look at it and we sit
inch mile wild deal sort of mentality.
Absolutely. We do find ourselves spreading out, especially in those third-party relationships. Sometimes we'll sell across. Sometimes we get a finder's fee. But generally speaking, there's enough work for everybody in their expertise. And we find some real experts. I mean, AV is a great example of something that you think is easy to do, but really, really isn't, especially when you bring in health and safety, all the workmanship. I mean, just silly things. We find people who are supposed to be doing a job will need a license to go up on one of the cherry pickers, for instance. And this is not an area of expertise for us. This is not something that we're prepared to do.
So let's move on. So a lot of times I hear about vendors going into either distributors or resellers and saying to them that you're a platinum partner, or you're a gold partner, you're a silver partner, or you're a bronze partner, you're a premium partner, whatever it is, and stipulating technical capabilities for them to even do business with them. So tell the listeners a bit about that. Why would vendors stipulate that you've got to have X amount of people with this exams or X amount of people that just to get an extra badge?
Yeah. Okay. Sure. And this is an interesting one because it's again one of the areas of why we exist. Because you'll have a vendor. Many people will know this. You have a vendor and they'll have a channel program, which I don't know, might be silver, gold, platinum, for an obvious one. And along with that program will come benefits, one of which is discounts. So a silver partner might get 10%, gold partner might get 20%, platinum partner 30%. But along with those benefits come obligations. And some of those obligations will be you'll have sales trained people, you'll have technically trained people. And to get the highest discount levels, it will include technically trained, certified individuals, which is great if you're a single vendor, But if you're a channel that sells 7, 8, 9, 10 vendors, the chances of you having 7, 8, 9, 10 individuals who are technically trained is not likely.
Impossible.
Absolutely, right? It's too costly, especially going back to the 1 day a week scenario. So what you end up having is one person who's technically trained in 9 products, which again doesn't hold any water, because that one person, first of all, can't know 9 products well enough, but second of all, isn't available to do anything with them. So there's this artificial leveling up, if you like, of the channel partners, where all the technical, or the vendors, believe they got technical resources, but the reality is they haven't.
So in essence, I could be a reseller or distributor, or a channel partner in just general.
Yeah.
I could be a Cisco Gold partner, a Lenovo Gold partner, a Palo Alto Gold, and that one person could potentially just doing the exams for all of them. Potentially. Why would they do that? Because they can't be utilising that. Is it just to get the discounts? Is that why the vendors will do it, just to stipulate?
Oh, that's what the vendors are doing. I mean, imagine, again, let's think you're a vendor and you're selling 10 million and you get an extra 10% of discounts, right? Well, then it's worth a guy doing exams. I mean, and that's it. And that's behaviour. I mean, we're here and we talk about sales. I mean, I know in the past you've probably talked about compensation plans and everything. It doesn't matter which compensation plan you do, people's behaviour will adjust to it. That's the way it works. You know, if you've got a sales manager as a salesman and got their own target, they'll focus on their own target if it provides more money. And that's just what that is. I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, there's an interesting alternative scenario to that, and that's when the vendor goes out and they want to know how many technical resources they've got in their channel. They'll kind of go out to maybe a distributor, it doesn't matter who the vendor is, and the distributor will go out to their channel, and let's say they go to 5 channels. They say, yeah, we've all got a person, but they're all using the same person from somewhere like us. So there's one person in existence, but the vendor thinks there's 5.
Which is absolutely nuts, isn't it?
But again,
that's sort of smoke and mirrors, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I've got this guy on my payroll. He's accredited to me. I've got him at XYZ trained. Yeah, I can utilise him. And there's 4 other companies saying the same thing.
Absolutely.
To the vendor, and the vendor doesn't know the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And so those numbers are always. It's always difficult to understand those numbers, and we're taking initiatives to see if we can start to understand that, because we're already in a great place. We work with 4 or 5 of the bigger distributors in the market space around security, and we get to see that picture of which technologies, which vendors are being successful to the stage that there's a shortage of skills, and it is successful, right? If you're selling a lot, there becomes a shortage of skills, so we can help them on that journey. But as we're seeing that across all of them from an independent perspective, we can also advise them back, and we're looking at ways in which we could go out to the channel a little bit further and start to gauge, because if there is a skills gap and we can prove it, we know there's a skills gap, but if we can prove it categorically, then we can start making adjustments to it, and that's where people like yourself come in.
So you're in a great position, because you are seeing that early, you know, with that scenario you're doing. How do you balance that in your own company? Whereas you're thinking, there's a shortage of for example, Palo Alto skills in the market. You've seen it. You've seen the requirements. There's not enough people who have got those skill sets. How do you advise a distributor or that client to sort of say, well, look, we need to do this now? What was your advice?
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll be looking at their pipelines. We're lucky enough to be close enough to some of our partners to understand what's coming down the line. And we'll be talking to them about how they've got it in terms of their shortages. But we're also talking to the vendors in terms of getting more people in the market space. So we'll look, are there people with those Palo Alto skills that are available to us? And available to us, they might be part of a community that wouldn't necessarily work for anybody, but they do jobs. So consultants. If there aren't enough consultants about, we'll go out and look who looks the right fit that could train quickly. So who's got reasonable skills and we could get them up to speed. And we're being supported quite well by the vendors who will give us certification credits, so that we can go out and find like-minded people. Yeah, I mean, there's some real forward-thinking vendors out there.
That is good for the vendors to do that, because that that's an investment from their point of view as well.
Absolutely. And
do you find they're open to that? If you're sort of saying, well, look, haven't got Joe Blogs, but I've got Jane Blogs who I haven't got the skills, but we could train up quick. Are they open to that?
Yeah, very much so.
That's great.
We've got 2 or 3 that are very open to that. But it's not just that. When we go to see Jane Blogs, and we say, hey, look, you've got these skills, would you be interested in upskilling or cross-skilling? We're seeing that to be a really effective message out to the consultant community, generally speaking. I mean, technology doesn't stand still. And if they keep their head down for too long, they either lose the opportunity of a job or they lose the opportunity to progress. So we're seeing that as being a really, really positive message.
Now, vendors might sound like they're doing a great job in investing in that and helping you
Not all of them.
With some of them are, Dave. Some of them are. But it sounds great that you know, and I like that vendors are actually giving, you know, credits and training, etc. What happens when you've done all the hard work, you've trained him up from zero to hero, and then they come and take him, and they actually come and take him off you? Because I'm hearing it all the time that, you know, while we're supposed to be in this collaborative environment with vendors, and we're going to help the channel out, and we're supporting the channel, and we don't take our channel partners, that goes completely out the window when they've got a shortage themselves. And I see it myself, that people in distribution, people in MSPs, people in VARs want to go and work for vendors. So if there's an opportunity to go and work for vendor, they're off. So how do you counteract that? And how do you actually partner with those vendors to sort of say, you're actually penalising me, which in turn is going to penalise you?
Yeah, it's massively true. And that does exist. And it's another reason we exist, because it's not happened to us so much, simply because of the types of people who tend to work with us at the moment.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, because they're either on staff for reasons of we're training them up. They're not necessarily vendor ready at this moment, or they're more senior and they've got juniors, which is a massive incentive for the types of people we got. Or we work with that community of people who prefer not to work in terms of a steady job. You know, it's lifestyle.
Is that a specific thing you've done because you might recognise that it could happen, or has it just happened by chance?
No. I mean, that's happened largely by chance. It's the types of people that are in that space for us. I mean, that's why they're still in that space. But the other thing is, you know, and again for the channel, the reason that works towards us because the channel have stopped training people for the reasons that you mentioned. It hasn't affected us so much, but we kind of expect it. It's an expectation that will happen. It will happen more and more. As we grow, we'll see it more. And that has to be part of our business model. As I say, we're that overlap, and we kind of get that people will move on, and we want that to happen. I mean, we've taken people who are graduates, and we've taken the time to invest in them becoming a trained engineer for us. And they'll work, and at some point in the future, we expect them for their career to progress.
It's horrible, Dave, isn't it? It's like,
but it happens,
you're training them knowing they're going to go. Where's the investment? Well, thanks a lot, I'm off now.
Yeah, and I think it only hurts if either you ignore it, or you bury your head in the sand on it, and it catches you by surprise. I think we've been around long enough now to know it happens. Now, if you expect it to happen at some point, you try and build that into your business plan. I mean, certainly from a junior perspective, you know, we're creating initiatives where we want to start training people in an academy style, so that they start to fill the skills gap, but we don't expect to retain them. We want them to come out the other end. We want them to come to a place like you, so that you can start fulfilling the requirements of your customers. And if you build on that business model, then you'll do well. You know,
what advice would you give to sort of, you know, MSPs and partners and resellers out there who are getting people in and sort of expecting them to sort of stay forever? You know, because they just can't believe they're leaving half the time when there's such a, you know, there's a talent shortage in the market.
Yeah.
Everyone's getting headhunted all the time. Everyone's getting offers all the time. If you've got any type of accreditations, you're being seduced and romanced everywhere.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to the owners of actually trying to retain their own talent?
I think when you're talking about retaining your own talent, it's created an environment and a culture that they want to stay. And I know it's easy to say that, but if you think about training and we think about the technical talent that we've got, continuation of training and is a massive incentive for them, much more than money. You know, and if they're going to a vendor, the one thing that does happen that's in your side is they get pigeonholed. So they're quite narrow at a single vendor. And what we try to do is multi-skill people. So again, if you're thinking about one head in my previous example, if you've given them enough skills that make them viable, but not too much that make them, you know, that their head's spinning, then they'll stay around. You make sure that you've got that environment to give them not necessarily managerial, but certainly make them mentor material. A lot of the more mature technical people that we have really like that.
Yeah.
So a career path generally is worthwhile. So I'd advise anybody to offer that career path, but I'd also say, you know, you want people to grow. You know, part of your process should be to bring them in at the bottom, not at the bottom, but bring them in somewhere in your organisation and keep growing. And I think that's worthwhile. And most vendors, whilst they will hire people, they'll hire people for specific gaps. They won't hire people to satisfy the whole market space.
Yeah,
I mean they genuinely won't. because no vendor wants their person on site for a year. It's too costly for them, and that's why vendor prices are so high.
Yeah, I think you know, when I've tried to speak to MSPs and VARs, almost, you know, going on what you said there, unless they're, and people don't talk about succession planning, they actually think you know, if I give that guy the job, you know, he'll be there when he's, you know, 65. It just doesn't work like that anymore. And I think if you're not, you know, and my advice to be, if you're not thinking about that, almost like a football team, the succession plan is at 35, he's probably not going to be able to score goals. We've got to bring the 19-year-old in or whatever it is. I think if you're not actually thinking of succession plan in your own company, you're going to be in a shock because suddenly they're going to transfer a transfer request in, and obviously then
absolutely
they're gone. It's a shock.
And it's a big risk, and you probably know statistics better than me, but if they're about to go and you counter offer, they're going to go anyway.
Yeah. It's more than 60%.
So again, you're much better off thinking about, well, where's my next generation coming? What am I going to do next? And interestingly as well, you know, we mentioned before, there's not so much of a skills gap so much as a mismatch sometimes. You know, when we see people of very high ability doing relatively low level work. You know, a real security expert might be putting a box into a data center. You don't really need that. You can already bring somebody in from that succession planning scenario and get the right person doing the right job is your first step. And again, if you're a reseller, you will have different levels of technologies in terms of that one's really easy to learn, that one's really difficult to learn. So let's get a little bit more bang for our buck early on with a more junior person, and then eventually train them through. And as you say, that gives you a much better idea of a succession plan.
One thing that I get asked a lot about is, and it's easy. I think it's easier if they're technical, because technical training you can actually have a badge and accreditations.
Yeah.
What about sales training? You know, how can we invest in actually training up salespeople? Because I get a lot of companies say, right, we'll have an academy and we'll train them up. We'll train them how to get on the phone and email, the basics, etc.
Yeah.
Right, you know how to pick up a phone call. Right, okay, great. What you need to do now is call the MD of HSBC and see if you can get through to them. And they just absolutely rub it in the headlights.
Yeah.
How can we encourage companies to sort of like continually train and invest in actual sales? Because I feel like salespeople, they get trained at the start and it's off you go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see that as well. And I think when you kind of like, so I've done training in the past, and we've written some now for technical people, but it's available for commercial people. And a lot of that is about, we call it a foundation. So not people call it soft skills, which sounds rubbish, generally speaking, but a foundation allows you to start training yourself. You know, and I think about that. And as you mentioned, you go, here's your phone, here's a 1-day course. Now go out and do that, as opposed to here's what you're doing, here's what you're trying to achieve. How are we going to do that? I think the framing of the questions and the framing of the training is the one. I mean, one of the areas that I see, especially on new salespeople, is they're all asked for us to contribute to a CRM, so the process of a sale, and most of them are given the company CRM, and so certain times out of 10 that'll be out of the box, and what it does, it doesn't match what they're actually doing, or it matches what they're doing, but because you've told them to do it, they'll find any reason not to. And the way I've always looked at that is to give them a blank piece of paper, and write on one side, I don't know this guy, and on the other side, this guy buys from me regularly, and say, fill that in. And 9 times out of 10, you'll find they're filling that in how you would expect it to be. And all that is a CRM. You know, you've got a sales process there, and I don't think we're necessarily engaging people enough for them to want to continue their own training.
Yeah, and do you think, so once you've got a foundation of some sort of sales methodology, if you like, do you feel it's on the onus of the individual to continue that themselves, even if they're not getting the training from the company?
I think the individual could and should. I mean, we're talking about career, right? We're not necessarily talking about, and we've just mentioned about people leave. We're not talking about this is all you do in this job. We're talking about what's your value into the next job.
Yeah, what you bring to the market. Even if, you know,
absolutely.
If you're valuable on the inside, what you're going to be on the outside. So.
Yeah, and it's a funny thing, sales, because everybody thinks they can do it, right? And yet nobody can really articulate what it is. You know, I can say, can you fly a plane? I go, well, I know what it is, but I can't do it.
Yeah,
right?
I know where the cockpit is, but
yeah, and I know what you're doing, but I can't actually do it. I can describe it, and people can't really do that from sales. It's just, you're a salesperson, and how do you do it? And I'd always liken this, if you're an international athlete, a swimmer, you know, at 6 o'clock this morning, you'd be in the pool. You're practicing because you want to go to the Olympics, so you practice all the time. You're not racing, but you're practicing. And people in sales don't often, you know, what's my skill set? Well, my skill set's asking questions. My skill set is learning information. My skill set is finding stuff out. Did I practice that today? Did I consciously think about that at all? Or do I only do it when I pick up the phone?
Do you think as well, and going back to your point about the CRM systems, we'll get to the point where we'll have a new sales guy. I've got it in my own company. We'll have a new sales guy come in. Right, if you speak to a customer, you have to enter all the details of the conversation in the CRM system. Okay, Mark, do you do that? Well, no, I don't do that. Or, well, Aaron or Joe Bloggs, the other salesman. So I'm trying to mirror the top sales guys, Mark. But they're not entering the information. They're just concentrating on sales. But so I end up looking at it and thinking, so all the salespeople are learning are almost being administrators and doing all the fundamental things that they've been told to do.
Yeah.
But all the best and most successful salespeople are not doing those things that are taking them admin away from the sales. True. So how do you make sure it's? And we touched on it when we were over lunch. How do you make sure it's that process is coming to a company where it's not just we're doing well, we don't have to worry about it. Yeah. When it goes wrong, we've got a problem.
Well, and I think that's the big issue, right? I mean, and you've described something as well. If you think about security and you think about turning stuff on everybody's laptop, it's the MD at the top or the people at the very top that say, don't put on all the security protocols because I want to surf whatever website I want. But everybody at the bottom has to do it. Yeah. So it's the same principle, right? And I think that this is something which is ingrained in us. It's embedded in us. And the reason that you mention is when it's all going right. Which is going right for you at the moment, that's great. Nobody cares. Nobody worries that it's not happening. The big problem we've got is when it goes wrong, can you identify what went wrong? Can you identify at what stage? You can't.
If there's no process, you can't. You're just sort of fingering air thinking, actually, I don't think Joe did this or Jane did that.
It's all a guess.
We'll just have a crack at it, yeah,
Absolutely. And once it's a guess, people get fired for less. But as a company, you can't react, you can't respond. If you're not putting enough in the top of your pipeline, is there a reason? Is that between step 1 and step 2? Or is it you're not progressing it? Is that step 4 and step 5? And if you can break that down and know what step it is, then you can take some action. I think that makes a lot more sense. And the challenge you've got as a business owner, generally speaking, is you only want to take that action when something goes wrong. You don't want to.
And I think as well, again, when you're starting out as a business, and I can speak from a business an experience of this. Process isn't important. It doesn't feel important. Let's just sell some stuff and get some money in the bank. But suddenly, as you start getting bigger,
growth is important.
Yeah, if you can't replicate that, or there is no process, it just goes out the window. And if you're busy on that hamster wheel, it is quite difficult to get off.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think again, I can only speak to the companies that I've been involved in and the situation I've been involved in. I think it's really important to try and set aside some time where you're understanding what everybody's challenges are. I mean, as a salesperson, you try and understand the challenges of your customers, because that's how you sell, right? I'm going to meet the challenge that you have, and that's how I sell you something. And I think internally, sometimes we need to look internally and say, well, what are our challenges? Is it between Department A and Department B? Because when we first started, Department B didn't exist. And in a growing company, these things change constantly. And if you're not kind of asking people and understanding and asking the right questions internally, you're never going to find out. And that must be the hardest thing in the world as a sales owner, sales manager, or a business owner and business manager, is to be surprised by that problem and then find out that everybody knew that problem existed for 6 months.
Yeah, because these job titles are coming out and these departments, you've said it, and when I again, I feel like I sound like I'm a dinosaur, but when someone said to me, the customer success department, there was customer success. What isn't that customer services? No. Yeah. This is a customer success. Is a sales role, but they've already been signed up. No, that's sales support or customer. And then suddenly you're actually creating roles that you actually never heard of, and it's very difficult. So on that point, do you think and I look at it on LinkedIn a lot, that when people come into companies, they almost want like a different job title every year to actually show their progression? And what's your view on that?
Yeah, no. First of all, I agree with you. It's astonishing. I mean, I've hired people, and the clincher has been, what's the job title?
Which is not the job.
The job title. Yeah, we've gone backwards and forwards more on that than the salary, or the options or whatever it is. So what's my title? And again, it goes back to that ego of progression. And I think we probably saw it first. It came out of America. People were a director of Staples, and over here you were a director of a company. You had an obligation. And I think before you knew it, there was a vice president of everything, and it all changed. And LinkedIn has probably contributed to that to a certain extent. simply because it's all visible. You knew about the car salesman piece.
Yeah, absolutely. You couldn't get away from that.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the points that we've touched on already is the talent shortages, and one of the things that we're trying to do here at Robertson Sumner is educate the channel on investing in youth, whether that's from school leavers or college leavers or graduates, etc., to bring on the next generation of salespeople and technical people. Now, one thing I've never heard is someone trying to educate people younger than that.
Okay.
So we've got Dave's book here, which is Trusting Web Links, which is aimed at, well, what age is it aimed at? You tell me.
It's aimed at 3 to 9. Because these are the ages that people are getting devices.
Yeah, so 3 to 9 year olds. So actually educating people on going into our industry, which I think is it's wonderful, and actually I really do. What inspired you to do that?
So I work with Aditinet. Theme there is people. I work with the police as well on young criminals from my background, and that's people who get in trouble with their IT skills at a certain age and on the cusp of criminality. And it's how do we get them into our industry. But it kind of also strikes me, and we talk about women in business and what have you, women in IT, that now we're introducing devices and IT and risk to the younger age groups. We need to start looking at mitigating that with messages as well. And I'm personally a believer, and we ask the question a lot, probably ask it of women, not maybe of me, but women in IT, why not? And I think it is stigmatised, but I also think that younger girls get on a different path very early on. And the reason that I wanted to introduce these books, and it's with a partner, Sandrine, is there are lots of risks out there, but it's really difficult to tell a child not to click on a web link. Right? I mean, that's just difficult. So we were looking at ways in which we can start to de-risk devices and de-risk IT generally. So this is a series of 5 books, actually. One of them's Online Dangers with Charlie the Chameleon. So to give you the example of what that's all about, is when people are being groomed online, it will be by a middle-aged man who's pretending to be a 14-year-old girl. You know, now what we want to get into the children is that's a chameleon-like behaviour, because we know what a chameleon is. It changes, and it changes to suit its background. So if we can start to educate children on the behaviour that exists, that they're risk, then hopefully we can reduce the problems. And if we reduce the problems, then we can hopefully entice them into our industry. Because right now, if you imagine, I've got an iPad. My only expectation of that iPad is it does good things. So if it does good things, that's my expectation. The only time I recognise that iPad's doing something different is if it does a bad thing. So my only experience of IT is bad. And what we need to do is we need to start helping children mitigate that, to reduce the drop-off before we start seeing them into STEM, and to reduce and to increase the opportunity for them to come to us. And by the way, whilst it's aimed at 3 to 9 year olds, there's also a generational issue, because children go home and they ask their parents for advice, and in certain generations, there's no advice available. So it's kind of there for parents to read and educate themselves at the same time. So the idea is you open up a conversation. Hey, have you got any Charlies on your account today? Have you got any Charlies on your Facebook? Any chameleons? And we've got an elephant, for instance. Elephants are about long memories. If you post it online, it's like an elephant. It will last forever. You know, and this is what we're trying to do.
Yeah, really, really good. I applaud you, Dave, for that. I think it's really excellent. I'm trying to tell people, but I'm certainly not writing books about it. So that's really good.
It's not Shakespeare, right?
Yeah, no,
we included colouring in pages just to detract you from the story.
So for the listeners, I met Dave at the CRN Awards, which I didn't really want to meet him after you won the award, because I was very disappointed.
Never stopped.
I want you to tell the listeners of how that happened, because this is the first time you've ever won in for the award, and you're a company of 4 years.
Yeah. And
so tell me how the application process. What made you go for it?
Okay, as I mentioned earlier, we kind of went from being white label to being okayed to being promoted. But it was a process, and what we wanted to do was come out of the shadows, first of all. Like a lot of companies, and you've had a couple of guests on recently, because we sit as a service, many people didn't know who we were. And so our idea for entry was to put ourselves effectively on a screen with some really remarkable and well-known companies like yourselves, Agilitas, Comscare. So the types of people we admired, our objective initially was to be a finalist alongside.
You won though. You took my award. I wasn't happy, Dave.
Yeah, I know. You made that clear afterwards. And in the video, and in the LinkedIn, and I think you've done more posts about it than we have.
Yeah.
So no, I know, and you know, it was a surprise for us to win. I mean, we did, and we followed it. I mean, the one thing I'd say about the award was it really made us examine our company.
Which was great. I know you said that earlier.
Yeah, and when
so actually, the application process which is a good thing.
The process was a good thing. So the process was asking questions. You know, what are your case studies? What are your values? What are your initiatives? What are you doing that's different? And it made us take a step back and say, well, what are they? And then in the presentations in between the entrance and the awards, we actually amended the way we talk to people, and that was all the process. So the CRM process was a great process for us. You know, and we stuck to the brief, and obviously it worked.
Yeah. To be honest, it's just actually we'll put it in the trophy cabinet. We've done it. Has it helped? Has it helped the business?
It's been astonishing. Actually, it's really. I'm here. There's one thing, but I think, you know, we, like everybody, we had a pipeline. We had customers. It helped our customers internally to give us more work. It helped move our pipeline along quite dramatically, and we've probably had more inquiries in the time since the award than, you know, 6 months before the award. And we were already doing really well. We're already inundated, so we're growing. You know, from our perspective, it's been nothing but good news. It's real validation of who we are and what we do.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So my last couple of questions. The first one, which I do tend to ask everyone, but I think you're in a great position to answer it. What bit of advice would you give to someone who's really wants to make them a name for themselves, either in a technical or a sales role, in a contributor role, or leadership into management? What bit of advice would you to be successful in our channel?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to pick a mentor. You've got to have good experiences. So you've got to look to people within your organisation that you do admire and you respect, so that you're effectively aligning yourself to that to learn. You've got to learn. Every day's a learning opportunity. And then pick a style and be that. Just be true to it. Don't muck about, don't change, but be what you are and be true. Because I do think, you know, again, you've talked about trust on the programme. And if you have a style and you've got a mentor that you respect and you can follow in those footsteps, then I think you can't go far wrong. You'll build trust, and as a result of that, you'll build longevity.
Great. And my last question, obviously, and Dave, I probably do say this every time, but you have been a really great guest. I've really enjoyed today. You really have. I think you've had some great questions. Is there two people that you think would be great that we could get on the show that the listeners would be enjoying their story and their views on the channel?
Yes, probably. I think the first one would be Sandrin Stead. He's my co-author, but he comes from a completely different background. We've worked at a couple of companies that are the same, but never together.
Okay.
And he's got some really interesting views on the channel generally, I think.
Okay, great.
Generally speaking. And the other one is a guy called Ollie Carter. Now, at the very first, when I was at Sophos, when I moved up, Ollie came in as my junior.
Right.
So
okay.
we trained through. He ended up as my sales manager in the channel and opened up the channel for Sophos. And now he's really well regarded in the channel. He works for Extra Hop. And I think those two people might have some really cool insights for you.
Great. Dave, you've been a fantastic guest. Thanks very much for your time.
Cheers, Mark.
Take care.
That.
Bye. Thanks for joining us and listening to another episode of our Channel Chat podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard and are listening on iTunes, please could you give us a review and subscribe in order to get the newest episodes as soon as they're released. Otherwise, as always, we release an episode every Thursday at midday, so hopefully you can join us then.